This is a crisis, so let's cut to it. I'm the Multiverse's finest BJ.
And I'm Action Jackson. Thank you for joining us at the Comics Quest and our continued decryption of the DC Cosmology.
Within 50 years, DC Comics had grown in scope, at times influencing global culture, branching into new forms of media, and inspiring millions along the way. The company's success was far and beyond anyone's expectations, but DC's storied history made their publishing line too convoluted for any rational human being to try and make sense of.
The fine folk at DC Comics knew they faced dire straits. Externally, comic books just weren't selling like they used to. The emergence of shopping malls, arcades, and premium TV options established themselves as the typical forms of American entertainment.
Even still, throughout the 70s and early 80s, generations of people had grown up reading comics.
A generation of fans and creators who both demanded more maturity from the medium.
So, by the end of the Bronze Age, the Comics Code Authority and their stamp of approval was mostly just a suggestion for publishers to follow.
From a certain point of view, comic books were in a great spot, free from politicization. But the reality of the time was new comic book sales were in a slump.
DC's reputation among readers soured over the decades, for various reasons, but none were more obvious than the multiverse.
What began as a loose series of connections between characters, the multiverse became unwieldy as time went on. Furthermore, creators and fans felt more welcomed at Marvel Comics because of their streamlined continuity with new, compelling characters.
DC's next steps had to be calculated in a way that would attract a broader audience, simplify the publishing line, capitalize on a burgeoning collector's market, and not just set the stage for future stories, but the company itself.
As opposed to previous comic book ages that kicked off with an appearance of a character or just a damn good comic book, the modern age of comics is widely agreed to have started in 1986 with the release of Watchmen, The Dark Knight Returns, and of course, Marv Wolfman and George Perez's Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Crisis on Infinite Earths set a precedent because it truly is an odyssey that can only be experienced as a comic book.
The limited series runs the gambit in terms of characters, timelines, and settings, while absolutely nailing the tone of impending doom versus unwavering hope.
Crisis on Infinite Earths, or Crisis, is how DC effectively made amends with their storied past and sculpted the future of the American comic book industry.
Together, Marv Wolfman and George Perez,
and really everyone who was working for DC,
meticulously wove a story that took the characters floating around the convoluted multiverse and threw them into the first ever comic book blockbuster event, the death of the multiverse, Crisis on Infinite Earths.
DC had been struggling to counter a multifaceted dilemma where comic books were losing their popularity to everything else.
DC hadn't been the most popular comic book publisher for decades. Old fans were worried their years of commitment would never pay off, and what new fans there were forced to fend for themselves.
I'm so sorry. I failed you. You trusted me. And I failed you.
Coming hot off the heels of the DC implosion and a rapidly changing American comic book industry, DC had to adapt to survive.
Marvel Comics had become the dominant force in the American comic market. Rough sales figures don't lie. Marvel is the top dog.
But less regulation over the marketplace saw the rise of independent comic book publishers, like Malibu or Dark Horse Comics, leading to more experimental storytelling capturing a share of the market that could now be sold directly to comic book stores.
DC would find a very unconventional answer that would satisfy most of these existential crises.
We have established what canon and continuity are, but for most of DC's early history, neither were the selling points.
In the past, DC Comics succeeded because their tales were thought-provoking power fantasies.
But the collective universes felt too episodic for modern sensibilities.
What happened in the last issue might not have any impact on the next issue, which is to say, what you are reading right now ultimately won't matter in the future.
Crisis on Infinite Earths is the ultimate climax for all battles, deaths, and relationships to cap off DC's 50-year anniversary.
Crisis on Infinite Earths was
And is
unprecedented for being one of the first plots to meaningfully justify an in-universe reboot.
To put things as delicately as we can, when the worlds of DC are undergoing a crisis, things are absolutely fucked. At time of writing, there have been 9 official capital C crises, ranging from Crisis on Infinite Earths, 0 Hour Crisis in Time, Infinite Crisis, Final Crisis, Flashpoint, Convergence, Dark Knight's Metal, Death Metal, and most recently, Dark Crisis.
Each crisis aimed to resolve some issue with canon or continuity, comment on the state of the industry, and sell a metric shit ton of comic books.
Before 1986, DC Comics took place across
At minimum,
5 different realities that had their own canon and continuity that informed the same general cosmology. The Crisis on Multiple Earths saga is really the best precursor to Crisis on Infinite Earths because it featured many of those legacy characters that DC had relegated to one of those different Earths.
however, to differentiate this crisis from any of its ancestors, DC published around 50 other tie-in comics, all of which are less integral than supplemental to the plot. For those reasons, we will mainly be covering the 12-issue event.
That is, unless DC decides to send us that quite frankly badass Crisis on Infinite Earths box set, in which case we would consider issuing an addendum to this video.
So be aware, we will be covering the entire plot, while not trying to ruin it for the uninitiated. But still, spoiler warning for a nearly 40-year-old comic.
For simplicity's sake, we are going to tell this story as it unfolds chronologically, rather than the way it was actually presented in the story.
In doing so, we are actively undermining the overall pacing of the story.
So, we apologize. Crisis on Infinite Earths was an immense undertaking, and it doesn't seem quite right or fair to condense one of the most significant moments in the American comic book industry into one small video floating around on the internet.
But telling the story chronologically allows us to better decrypt DC's cosmology. Here we humbly offer our best interpretation of the Crisis on Infinite Earths.
10 billion years ago, Krona, a member of the all-knowing Guardians of the Universe, sought the unknowable.
His scientific gateway was equally brilliant and unethical. Upon ignition, Krona found his answers, the divine hand of all creation, literally in the process of,
You guessed it,
creation. But in doing so, Krona disrupted the process of the Big Bang.
where instead of creating one reality, infinite realities were born. The canonical creation of the multiverse.
This interaction reframes what was established in Green Lantern number 40 by John Broome, where we simply saw Krona unleash evil on the universe.
Wolfman shows us what Broome didn't, and now Broome's humble contribution to the DC universe has grown to threaten the entire multiverse.
Most of the Guardians were pissed at Krona because he actively defied them, but they were unsure how to punish him.
Basically, they shipped his ass to the Phantom Zone.
Forgive us!
Still, some Guardians were unsatisfied.
Krona created an infinite multiverse of undeniably altruistic beings, but also unmitigated evil to match.
Krona's experiment also created the antimatter reality, where a presence awoke who we deem a certified badass motherfucker, the Anti-Monitor.
The Anti-Monitor is a god of cosmic proportions, more than capable of universal genocide through the use of an all-consuming wave of antimatter energy and an unyielding army of slave shadow monsters.
He's a bad guy.
Thankfully, in the universe's tendency towards balance, his brother Mar Novu was born the Monitor.
Where the Anti-Monitor sought to pervert and destroy reality, the Monitor sought to observe and protect it. Upon learning of one another, the two engaged in a million-year war, only for them to knock each other unconscious for another 9 million years.
And in that 10 million years, the multiverse prospered, eventually giving way to Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3, and so on. Each Earth was living in its own reality, in relative peace, until somewhere in the multiverse, a dude named Pariah kinda accidentally awoke the slumbering Anti-Monitor, who promptly started destroying the multiverse.
The Monitor never wanted to interfere with life, but after observing the final moments of Earth 3, where the totality of its universe's inhabitants were incinerated by the unending wave of antimatter, the Monitor is forced to take action. The Monitor scoops up the last son of Earth 3 and rallies a team of the multiverse's finest, including his daughter, Harbinger.
Earth 2's original Golden Age man of action, the Superman, is called to lead the Monitor's team into the 30th century, where they will activate a pillar that will protect reality from the Anti-Monitor's all-consuming wave of destruction.
This does not go well.
Even Solivar the Gorilla King is killed in action.
On Earth 1, the Flash is seemingly vaporized before our very eyes. While the Anti-Monitor's attack starts to affect all of time and space, he successfully enslaves a longtime JSA villain, Psycho Pirate.
Using Psycho Pirate's powers of emotional manipulation, the Anti-Monitor forces Harbinger to kill her dad, the Monitor.
Things are looking pretty bleak.
With the death of the Monitor, it looks like the Anti-Monitor has won.
But
Aha! As I suspected.
The Monitor hid one final trick up his sleeve.
his death actually releases his godly essence to form a pocket dimension where Earth 1 and Earth 2 are safe from the Anti-Monitor. When Harbinger snaps out of the Anti-Monitor's trance, she gathers many of the greatest heroes from all timelines and worlds to explain the total peril they all face.
Pariah is there, and in full disclosure, I've never liked Pariah. So all you need to know is he's there, he complains a lot, and he's kind of sort of responsible for this whole thing.
Our heroes also meet an aged-up Alexander Luthor. Collectively, the trio drop a bunch of exposition, and may or may not be walking Deus Ex Machinas.
In the meantime, the heroes of Earth 1 and 2 go to assess the damages on their homes.
Things are wrecked, and time is a mess. Nazis are fighting dinosaurs. Cavemen argue on Fox News, and Superman uppercuts a saber-toothed tiger.
No one is happy with the state of things, but hey, it's home.
But wait, there's more. The Anti-Monitor continues his conquest by increasing Psycho Pirate's powers to cosmic proportions. Psycho Pirate sows distrust, fear, and hatred across all remaining realities, causing regular men, women, heroes, and villains alike to riot in the streets. As a countermeasure and last resort, Harbinger utilizes the last of her godly powers to merge the remaining realities into one human centipede-looking Earth.
Now, Earth 1, 2, Charlton, S, and X are all partially merged in the limbo space created by the Monitor.
At this point, the heroes are straight up not having a good time.
Tired of getting their shit wrecked, they decide to go to the Anti-Monitor's home to wreck his shit.
Alexander Luthor proceeds to tear a fucking hole through reality and into the antimatter reality.
The heaviest of hitters go lay siege to the Anti-Monitor's fortress, and it goes abysmally.
The impromptu Justice League successfully destroys the Anti-Monitor's newest superweapon, but they all suffer wounds. The Anti-Monitor beats Superman closer to death than the last time Lil Wayne drank lean on an airplane, the last time Hawkeye acted like Hawkeye IRL, and the last fan who asked Ezra Miller for a picture.
The only person capable of hearing Superman's cries for help is, of course, the woman of action, Supergirl.
Oh, Supergirl. Poor Supergirl. Sure, you were created to be a shameless Smurfette version of Superman, and sure, you kinda dated your horse sidekick, but we know there is so much more to you than that.
In fact, Supergirl, you were the only person in the entire multiverse capable of hurting the Anti-Monitor, even destroying his physical body.
only for him to turn around and promptly incinerate you. But without your sacrifice, no one would have been able to escape.
And for that, we thank you. Also managing to escape the chaos, the Anti-Monitor creates a new physical body with a personal vendetta against all who champion his brother's mission.
The Anti-Monitor cracks the whip, forcing his totally not slave army to complete his newest superweapon.
Periodically throughout the story, we the readers are given the briefest glimpse of Barry Allen the Flash.
Come to find out, he was imprisoned by the Anti-Monitor.
Considering the Flash was one of the few characters in the entire cosmology that could travel between realities at will, the strategy behind his abduction prevented the Earths from communicating and reacting to the crisis.
Anti-Monitor, you cunning bastard. After being abducted, tortured, and hearing of the death of his friends in countless worlds, the Flash leads a totally not slave revolt.
Of course, the Anti-Monitor is quick to squash the rebellion.
But he's not fast enough to stop the Flash from destroying his superweapon.
As the Flash generates a speed vortex, antimatter energy is drawn out of the superweapon and into his body.
In the process, Barry is able to go back in time, where he warned Batman and Kid Flash about the Anti-Monitor. However, this heroic act takes a heavy toll on the Flash, and he literally disintegrates in front of our very eyes.
Barry Allen set Earth's heroes in motion and prevented their total annihilation.
While badass, the saddest part about the incident is that the Flash's sacrifice goes practically unnoticed.
Supergirl gets a proper funeral, but Barry Allen, the Flash, dies alone in a negative reality, never to be seen from again. For now.
Modern audiences don't seem to appreciate the death of the Flash. At the time, death was usually prevented in comic books. When death came a-knocking, it targeted love interests, bad guys, and the occasional Aquababy, not capital S superheroes, least of all household names like the Flash.
If an A-lister like the Flash could die, then literally no one was safe. But allegorically, the Flash had to die.
Considering he ushered in the Silver Age in 1956, his death is a perfect benchmark for a new age of comics, where tones became darker, death had consequences, and stories featured layered nuances.
And for all of that, we thank you.
Back on the human centipede Earths? Things are starting to look up. Sure, a grip of superheroes just died, countless innocences were lost, and reality has been partially merged with 4 other realities. But hey, it beats total annihilation.
Heroes and world leaders from all Earths convene at a peace summit held on Earth 1 and Earth 2 to discuss how the new living situation is gonna go down.
This is a comically short-sighted plan, because every villain teams up, immediately conquering the 3 defenseless Earths, while the good guys have their nice little summit.
At which point Lex Luthor and Brainiac show up and are like, hey guys, you have, I don't know, 30 minutes to give us the last 2 Earths, or else we're gonna blow up all 5 Earths.
Chaos erupts across the planets in what appears to be the final battle between good and evil, but with both sides taking heavy losses, it seems the war comes to a stalemate.
And lo, the Spectre.
God's vengeance incarnate appears in the sky where all of God's creatures can see him proclaim how the rest of the day is going to shake out if humanity keeps fucking around.
He warns that while humanity squabbles over power and territory, the Anti-Monitor has made his way to the dawn of time, where he will fundamentally alter the process of creation so that life would never and will never exist.
Understandably, the heroes and villains form an alliance that is a lot like telling a Parkinson's joke to Michael J. Fox. at his Florida condo during an earthquake. It goes over pretty shaky.
Putting all differences aside, practically everyone who has ever worn a costume shows up to end the crisis.
We're talking about the JLA, JSA, Teen Titans, the Legion of Superheroes, the Freedom Fighters, the Shazam family, the New Doom Patrol, the Challengers of the Unknown, and tons of others. Even Superboy Prime, the last survivor of an extinct reality, shows up and is like, hey.
So anyway, the empowered cast of the DC Multiverse lead a two-pronged attack against the Anti-Monitor, while the rest of reality is left to fend for itself.
The villains find themselves 10 billion years in the past and begin a ground invasion on the planet of Oa. In doing so, they attempt to prevent Krona, the Guardian who started all of this, from seeing the hand of creation, thus preventing the creation of the multiverse, the antimatter reality, and the Anti-Monitor from ever existing.
Truth be told, the villains never stood a chance against the Guardians of Oa, are promptly crushed, leaving Krona to continue his experiment.
The heroes travel to the dawn of time to prevent the Anti-Monitor from altering the course of history.
But they're too late.
The Anti-Monitor then reveals it was not Pariah's fault that the Anti-Monitor escaped. Rather, the Anti-Monitor used Pariah to free himself from his dormant slumber.
Or something.
And as it turns out, the Anti-Monitor actually wanted the heroes to show up at the dawn of creation.
Their collective cosmic, godly, magical, and all-around powerful essences act as the final ingredient for the Anti-Monitor to rewrite the history of creation.
Just as the Anti-Monitor waits for Krona to open the window to the dawn of time, the Spectre, reinforced by the most potent of magical users, begins to force the Anti-Monitor into the pit from whence he came.
Just when it looks like the heroes might squeak out a win, Krona opens a stupid fucking time portal and all of reality shatters.
Except not really.
The battle at the dawn of time ends with the 5 partially merged Earths consolidated into one singular setting called New Earth. New Earth's history came with logical benefits and tremendous repercussions, some of which were felt more immediately than others.
For starters, dozens of heroes are missing, or worse yet, never seem to exist, and only those present at the dawn of time have even the vaguest memory of their previous life.
Thus, Superman wakes up after having a bizarre dream and heads to his workplace, the Daily Star.
However, the Daily Star is the Daily Planet, and those aren't the co-workers he's known for decades. After Earth 1 Clark Kent gets that whole situation sorted out, it is directly stated there is only one past, and everyone needs to figure it out together.
They draw the same conclusion. There is no going home for anyone.
Harbinger reappears to explain that New Earth isn't as bad as it sounds.
But people are still grieving. The Huntress of Earth 2 goes to visit her father's grave, but it isn't there. Her Bruce Wayne seemingly never existed.
Batman shows up to reassure everyone. Those that didn't transition to New Earth did not never exist. They were just unpeopled.
Thanks for the reassuring words, Batman.
The general rules of the pre/post-crisis transition are tenuous, but seem to be 1.
Everyone present at the dawn of time did transition to New Earth, just without any knowledge of the multiverse.
2.
Characters that died pre-crisis did not transition to New Earth.
3.
There can, in fact, be 2 different versions of the same character so long as they're different people, with an example being Kal-El Superman and Kal-El Superman, or Alan Scott Green Lantern and Hal Jordan Green Lantern.
4.
Almost everyone wakes up with a case of mass amnesia.
Effectively, Amnesia gave DC the basis to pick and choose which specific aspects of any given character's pre-crisis canon would carry into their post-crisis future.
And as DC Comics realized, each of these ideas fall apart the more you scrutinize them, but those are the compromises that come with a reboot of this scale.
And Harbinger herself is like, look man, we can only explain this so much.
Just when you think the day is set and won, oops, the Anti-Monitor drags New Earth into the antimatter reality.
At this point, it's the final push for life. the Anti-Monitor unleashes an endless wave of shadow warriors to extinguish the last hope for sentient life. Beyond New Earth, some time and spacefaring characters,
and Animal Man,
stumble upon an unlikely ally in Darkseid.
Darkseid had previously taken the
Let them fight.
route, but it seems the Anti-Monitor has proved himself to be a threat to even the planet of Apocalypse.
On the other side of space, the heaviest hitters go to put an end to this once and for all. Arriving at the Anti-Monitor's fortress, our heroes find the remains of the Flash, sending Kid Flash into hysterics and a spiraling depression. Using sheer brute strength, everyone just goes office space on the Anti-Monitor.
With an assumed victory, Alexander Luthor Jr. calls for a tactical retreat.
Abandon your post! Flee for your life!
But holy shit! Earth 2 Wonder Woman is vaporized by a barely breathing Anti-Monitor.
Leaving only the Superman of Earth 2, Alexander Luthor of Earth 3, and Superboy Prime to defend the last vestige of the multiverse.
However, help comes from the highly sophisticated Apocalypse technology, once Darkseid tampers with the powers of Alexander Luthor, due to his essence being compiled of both negative and positive matter.
Darkseid successfully uses Alexander Luthor as a conduit to unleash a blast of energy so powerful it completely destroys the Anti-Monitor's physical shell. But if we have learned nothing from this episode, it should be noted the Anti-Monitor is one tough son of a bitch.
And now, only his godly ethos remains with one final act in mind: the death of Superman.
And the Superman is having none of it.
After the cosmic torment the Anti-Monitor inflicted on the multiverse, Superman unleashes one punch, finally killing the Anti-Monitor. In doing so, the antimatter universe seems to collapse on itself. In those fleeting moments, Alexander Luthor manifests Earth 2 Lois Lane. Together, he, Superboy Prime, Lois Lane, and the first superhero, Superman, embrace their sacrifice.
The destruction of the multiverse was mandatory for free life to prosper.
Those that remember the crisis count the losses of the friends and loved ones who gave their lives to protect a world they could never know. In a somber ending, the characters and the reader are left with nothing but to look forward.
Worlds died so one world could live. And because of that, Crisis was never the beginning of the end, but the origin of the future. The repercussions of Crisis might seem obvious. It rebooted and streamlined the entire DC multiverse into a single setting. But what Crisis means is all the more interesting. The real-world factors of an aging audience, unfounded stigmas, new forms of entertainment, and of course competition, each played a part in killing off alternative comic book publishers, titles, characters, and even genres.
In the past, DC Comics and every other publisher sold themselves on their variety. That variety was evident in the inordinate number of small comic book publishers employing an immense number of aspiring creators, creating an incalculable number of superheroes and characters set across an inconceivable number of comic books, never to be heard from again. The tagline of Crisis on Infinite Earths, "Worlds lived, worlds died, and nothing will ever be the same," rings true.
Because what mainstream comic book worlds are really left? The big two, DC and Marvel.
At the time in the United States, independent comics were still on the cusp of popularity.
And many legacy comic book publishers went defunct or sold themselves to one of the big two. Metaphorically then, DC's original multiverse died, just like countless other comic book publishers. Superheroes really were the only thing that could save any mainstream interest in the comic book medium.
The comic characters you, myself, and everyone else thinks of are the top 1% of the 1% of all comic book characters ever created.
Which should speak to their enduring appeal, not as corporate mascots, but as genuine icons, regardless if we're looking at any pre- or post-Crisis comic.
Simply put, the entire pre-Crisis fictional history ran from June of 1938 with the creation of Superman in Action Comics number 1, and ended in February of 1986 with Crisis on Infinite Earths number 10, Death at the Dawn of Time, when the multiverse was destroyed.
In more ways than one, DC's entire pre-crisis history reads a lot like The Simpsons.
Crossovers were unique, special guests felt special, and a shared love for apes are just a few of their similarities.
Get your paws off me, you dirty ape!
He can talk.
He can talk, 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 he can talk.
I can see!
Even still, the canon and continuity of The Simpsons is uncertain. After all, Bart has been in the 5th grade longer than Jackson or myself have been alive.
And we, the viewers, are just left to assume that everything shown on The Simpsons has happened.
Except for that weird Skinner thing and the Tree Houses of Horror, which themselves are a love letter to the horror comics Matt Groening read growing up.
Either way, the entirety of DC Comics' pre-crisis canon and continuity is just as, if not looser than, The Simpsons, with few solid explanations of when the events of one comic happened in relation to another.
For those reasons, DC let their publishing line, a stand-in for the entire comic book industry, go down in one final blaze of glory, to give audiences something brilliantly familiar.
For that, we respectfully say, rest in peace to that chapter of the Cosmology.
With a special thank you to everyone who made it possible. From creators, to vendors, to fans, thank you.
But the one thing Crisis on Infinite Earths didn't do is explain the new setting. So let's talk about New Earth, George Perez and Marv Wolfman's
New Earth had unlimited potential, and for decades, it was the sandbox that brought the entire cosmology together in a unified fashion for the first time.
The general framework and world building of New Earth are presented in History of the DC Universe, where Harbinger has a new mission to uphold the truth. A truth that chronicles the history of this new post-crisis universe, especially New Earth.
It is worth noting Harbinger is something of an unreliable narrator, and most of what she tells us is second-hand information.
And yes, Crisis is a canonical event that did happen.
Characters remember the crisis.
No one remembers the pre-crisis multiverse.
Life, as the characters, creators, and fans knew it, was different.
Nonetheless, the history Harbinger provides is simply the most notable pre-crisis characters and stories that had such an irrevocable and unavoidable impact on history that they also happened in the post-crisis canon and continuity.
Harbinger understands very little of the universe's primordial history, other than the fact that cosmic, godly, magical, and all-around powerful essences played a part in the Big Bang.
Eons before the superhero appeared, an untold number of cosmic beings of incalculable power proliferated the universe. Oa was the first not to collapse from its own greed, and made many irrevocable impacts across the universe, like the Green Lantern Corps, an intergalactic police unit, each officer equipped with a ring that would make Rick James jealous.
The ashes and world debris from a race of old gods inadvertently catalyzed an era of new gods. On the planet of Apocalypse, a tyrant by the name of Darkseid seeks a mathematical proof where life is equal to death, and Darkseid is.
Thankfully, the world of New Genesis stands in contrast, as both are destined to fight until the end of their days.
Magic proliferated the cosmos.
For thousands of years, Lords of Order and Lords of Chaos used New Earth as a magical proxy war, reflecting humanity's prehistoric struggle with those same forces.
The gods of Olympus offered humanity some of its earliest flirtations with magic.
In fact, it was through the magic of the old gods that the kingdom of Atlantis survived total cataclysm, and the Amazonian people were provided paradise.
Powerful magical tools began to spread across New Earth, and numerous people took note.
The most fabled of which are the Helmet of Fate and Spear of Destiny, Camelot and Themyscira, the wizard Shazam, and his failed pupil Black Adam.
In the 15th century, a race of super genius gorillas built a secret city.
The 16th century saw pirates, vampires, and public domain figures.
As more people gained independence, the Americas found some of their earliest heroes. And following the American Civil War, figures like Jonah Hex sought to establish justice. If the price was right.
The late 19th century remains similar to our own, until Dr. Occult utilized technology and magic to become one of the first superheroes. Fascism is on the rise, and the time for heroes is self-evident when the Golden Age of Heroes sees magicians Zatara, the Sandman, Steel, the Flash, Hawkman and Hawkgirl, the Spectre, Johnny Thunder, Hourman, the Atom, Dr. Fate, the Green Lantern, and countless others formed the Justice Society of America.
The JSA led covert operations worldwide, quashing fascist and tyrannical powers wherever they stood. Even still, they didn't do it alone, as the All-Star Squadron, the Black Hawk, the Freedom Fighters, and Sergeant Rock's Easy Unit each played their own pivotal roles in helping end World War II.
With the war won, the US had zero desire for masked vigilantes.
Subsequently, a bill was proposed to unmask superheroes. As a result, the JSA disbanded, fading into public obscurity.
But with the dearth of heroes, the United States military created Task Force X, an expendable outfit of top-notch killers.
Around the same time, a baby in a spaceship lands in Kansas, a toddler discovers his heritage, and a young boy watches his parents die in a botched mugging. These children may not know it yet, but the Phantom Stranger lays in wait for the day where he will assist Superman, Aquaman, and Batman.
Suffering is not unique to mankind, as even on the distant world of Mars, the only surviving green Martian, J'onn J'onzz, is teleported to the strange and savage lands of Denver, Colorado.
Even though it seems the old gods had forsaken their lost and perfect race of Amazons, their final gift had reached maturity in the form of Wonder Woman.
Soon enough, inspired by the JSA, a new wave of heroes formed the Justice League of America. The rest of the world took notice of the growing number of heroes, and more individuals were inclined to pursue heroic endeavors.
While the new Teen Titans continued to grow up, another team came crashing down when the famous Satellite Justice League officially disbanded. But there can't be a world without the Justice League, so the infamous Justice League Detroit took to the streets.
Everyone's collective actions paved the way for heroes of the distant future.
With that, Harbinger bids us a simple farewell.
History of the DC Universe is the summation of the parts that was the Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Even though specific aspects of history of the DC Universe are no longer canonical, many of its elements are still being expanded upon today.
Most people are well acquainted with the likes of Gotham or Metropolis. Still, New Earth also connected other existing fictional cities, like Star City, Hub City, Fawcett City, and Central City.
All of these settings were the perfect playgrounds for the characters, making the whole DC universe all the more diverse and intimate. However, it might be a touch reductive to claim that History of the DC Universe and Crisis on Infinite Earths were the 1-2 punch that ended the Bronze Age.
Stone cold classics like The Watchmen, The Dark Knight Returns, and Daredevil Born Again also impacted the industry in a few profound ways.
Namely, comic books were becoming increasingly mature or dark, but those series proved that any comic can succeed regardless of its status or scope.
The Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns in particular are critically acclaimed, and it shouldn't go without mentioning that their collective success produced some of the first mainstream graphic novels or trade paperbacks.
But it seems that Moore and Miller's rightfully acclaimed work has overshadowed Crisis on Infinite Earth's impact.
For reasons, Crisis doesn't get placed under the same dark umbrella The Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns so often do, which is strange considering that all three were coming out concurrently. Crisis carried a metatextual weight where the then current audience was engaged with the death of the multiverse and some of the darkest alternate realities or elseworlds DC has ever published.
When in fact, Crisis may be the single most devastating event in all of comic books, if not fictional history, if we're going by sheer numbers alone.
We will say it again. The death of an entire multiverse.
Googleplexes of sentient beings, dead. That is distinctly different from 50% of the population in one reality and they all come back at the end type shit.
No, best estimates place our Earth's population at around 5 billion people in 1985.
Now multiply 5 billion by infinity. Dead. And that's not factoring in all the animals, aliens, and everything in between.
All those living creatures died, so roughly 5 billion people could live. It's hard to call that a clean W.
But let's say that's too abstract for people to really latch onto.
The real deaths are deeply symbolic to the cosmology. Barry Allen's death was the final nail in the Silver Age's coffin.
However, the death of Solovar the Gorilla King and/or King Gorilla says a lot about the direction DC wanted to take its new titles. Unfortunately, gorillas just weren't selling like they used to.
Comics were seen as kids' stuff because episodic flights of fancy often colored the cosmology in a jovial fashion, a fashion trend DC was looking to shed.
The death of Solovar is in many ways emblematic of DC letting go of their innocence.
But DC never forgot who they are, so it makes sense that the Superman didn't die. Instead, he is offered at worst a safe space for he and his, and at best, paradise. DC intended to make Superman the last Kryptonian, explaining why DC removed Earth 2 Superman and Superboy Prime from their comics. As a quick side note, our world died in the Crisis, which sounds stupid, but it did show DC's commitment to their new universe, in part by killing one of their most notorious settings.
All of that still doesn't fully explain why Supergirl had to die.
After all, Power Girl is Kryptonian, and she survived.
No. Supergirl had to die because DC was either not capable or not interested in making a comic for female audiences.
Off the top of our heads, Earth 2 Wonder Woman, Aquagirl, Helena Wayne the Huntress, and of course, Supergirl. Female characters faced much more brutal deaths than their male peers.
Was this DC's way to pull on the heartstrings of pubescent boys?
Or their way of getting back at the female audiences DC couldn't seem to reach at the time?
Or is this Venn diagram one circle?
We aren't sure and are probably just reading too much into it.
But the point stands. Comic books have been a traditionally male-dominated art and industry from their inception to their fan base because of seemingly small decisions that have decades of consequences.
We may take for granted the fact that DC, Marv Wolfman, George Perez, and company created the first event comic.
In the Golden and Silver Age, comics were selling as long as people were buying them.
The Bronze Age saw DC cancel many of their longest-running genre series once the experiment of limited series became financially lucrative and critically acclaimed.
It's in the name, so bear with us here, but limited series can be further divided into mini-series and maxi-series. The Sword of the Atom is probably the Atom's most famous story,
Even featuring his bitch ex-wife.
and in all likelihood wouldn't have been published if it wasn't told as a 4-issue miniseries.
Superhero scientist Ray Palmer, trapped at 6 inches tall in the Amazon rainforest, the Sword of the Atom.
With the success of so many miniseries, DC decided to experiment even further with maxi-series, usually 12 issues or longer.
Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld, is a wonderfully 80s example. Like if Labyrinth had a baby with Clueless and Sailor Moon.
In 1986, DC had both a critically acclaimed maxi-series and mini-series, with The Watchmen and The Dark Knight Returns. And while both are significant for getting people to take their comics
Arguably.
too seriously, we would argue Crisis on Infinite Earth's impact on the industry is even more important.
What made Crisis on Infinite Earths an event was not just the scope, but the build-up, climax, and payoff. See, the groundwork for Crisis on Infinite Earths was established as early as 1982 with the appearance of the Monitor in the New Teen Titans.
Legend tells that DC even hired a researcher to read every comic they had ever published in their 50-year history to ensure that no stone went unturned. Allegedly, this research is why the Crisis was hit with a handful of delays.
But for Crisis on Infinite Earths, a maxi series, to have a tangible impact across every DC comic book was unprecedented.
To that point, history of the DC Universe and Who's Who in the DC Universe proved the company was committed to its future, no matter how uncertain or perilous it looked.
Tell us if we're wrong here. Marvel's Secret Wars is, on the surface level, quite similar to Crisis on Infinite Earths. If for nothing else, they both present an eclectic cast of superheroes, and both are 12 issues long. For those reasons alone, Secret Wars has been considered by some to be the first ever event, with issue number 1 coming out 8 months before Crisis.
And as much as we genuinely do love Marvel's Secret Wars, the facts are simple. It did not have the same lead-up ambition, scale, or ramifications as Crisis, but it sure did have better marketing.
Marvel's supervillains are coming!
Secret Wars.
Can the Marvel superheroes stop them?
Toy deals and all.
Doctor Doom and Spider-Man, the Marvel Secret Wars collection. Other figures each sold separately.
The prologue to Secret Wars was minimal. Secret Wars is a classic for a reason, but it would be a stretch to argue that more than a sparse handful of issues act as a supplemental expansion or epilogue to the story.
Then again, can it be a secret war if everyone knows about it?
Regardless, with the exception of Spider-Man's black suit, you get the feeling the whole event was just business as usual within the Marvel mythos, with nominal impacts across the publishing line.
But the series remains profitable and beloved, eventually inspiring a spiritual sequel that gives the original Crisis a run for its money.
Even still, the concept of tie-in issues that explain where a character is during an event was new in the 80s, and the tie-ins in Crisis are some of the best you will find.
The first that come to mind are the Saga of Swamp Thing issues by Alan Moore, Steve Bissett, Rick Veitch, and John Totleben.
But, again,
Box set.
addendum video.
Think about it, DC.
Sorry for shilling or begging. Events are a useful metric when looking at DC because their intention is to present the entire DC universe holistically.
So the characters, themes, and storylines included in any event say more about the publisher as a whole than any single creator, issue, or series can.
Nothing has been the same since Crisis. For one, we can say with little research and high confidence that both DC and Marvel have attempted to recreate the success of Crisis on Infinite Earths with an events, practically every year since.
In fact, we're so accustomed to regular events, it's hard to imagine today's comic book industry without them.
But few comic book events have ever truthfully surpassed Crisis on Infinite Earth's ambitions or quality. Instead, many events seem intent on outdoing what the Crisis did.
But Crisis isn't just a good comic book.
Crisis on Infinite Earths is an event because it makes an entire medium of art more accessible and approachable for generations of people.
That being said, no work is above criticism, and some have labeled Crisis on Infinite Earths as too comic booky.
But if a comic book about a comic book comes across as too comic booky, we don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, but that only shows the scale of the story and awards the series to be infinitely rereadable.
And sure, there is a good amount of space science magic mumbo jumbo, but the tone, art, pacing, and emotional stakes never let it feel out of place.
For us, most of the criticism can be directed toward our 3 new characters, Harbinger, Pariah, and Alex Luthor, the walking expository plot device Deus Ex Machinas.
While they are the respective mouthpieces for the ethos, pathos, and logos argumentative case that the DC Universe needed to change, none of them are particularly fascinating, and no one was there to see them.
Still, we do have a soft spot for Harbinger. Thankfully, there's always room to move up in the worlds of DC Comics, so don't be surprised when a few of the names we've mentioned return.
To play devil's advocate, Crisis on Infinite Earth's biggest flaw might have been its intent, the death of the multiverse. DC was put in a box, and now stories had to make sense. Characters who in some cases really don't make sense standing next to each other now had to.
The death of the multiverse made it crystal clear that this was Warner Brothers DC Comics and their DC characters.
Creatives would have obvious influence, but by paring something as incomprehensible, varied, and complex as a multiverse down to a singular, linear, coherent universe, creative vision, intention, and authority trickled upward to editorial, executive, and promotional powers.
But as time has gone on, the multiverse has proved too powerful of a concept to ever stay dead. With the successful conclusion of Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC was a born-again virgin.
Meaning the future was free-ish of its pre-crisis constraints. Good and evil were naturally occurring phenomenon, and the characters had the free will to choose between the two.
Post-crisis DC characters had to prove their worth as heroes to us, the readers, often at the cost of innocent people, the compromise or sacrifice of morals, and overcoming personal trauma.
However, the characters had a rich sense of legacy that can be felt across any post-crisis series.
From here on out, our decryption of the cosmology will change.
Our previous videos were necessary for us to understand DC Comics today.
But in doing so, we were forced to make sweeping generalizations about people, time periods, characters, and stories.
We don't tell you enough how much we appreciate your support, how much we love the conversations we've had with you, or how much we love giving out that free comic to our top comment with every one of these videos.
And we definitely don't say how much we love you guys. But in some ways, we have failed you.
If you ask us, we really didn't get to talk about the comic book stories themselves until this video.
He really just said that.
Post-Crisis was when DC really started to make sense as a cohesive publishing line.
We can also thank Crisis for doing the heavy lifting in terms of creating a setting. From 1986 to 2011, almost every DC comic took place on New Earth, the amalgamation of all the pre-crisis Earths, and, in essence, DC's vast history.
As such, post-crisis DC Comics had a succinct fictional history, meaning the events of one series could reverberate into another in meaningful ways.
And considering the comic book market was shrinking, a smaller, more intimate publishing line incentivized readers to want to at least check out every title.
With a new-ish setting, loosey-goosey timeline of events, and relatively clean slate, every DC comic series was rebooted and reissued to #1, with only the historic Action Comics and Detective Comics retaining their original numbering.
With that, thank you for joining us. What is your favorite detail about Crisis on Infinite Earths that we completely overlooked? None of us at the Comics Quest can tell you how big of a deal you are to us, so please keep telling your neighbors, friends, lovers, and enemies. It makes a multiverse of difference.
But how well did DC's gamble pay off? Please, join us next episode as we discuss many of the most iconic DC stories ever told in our post-crisis decryption of the DC Comics cosmology.